Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 19 of the Level Up Symposium. My name is Andrew Scriber, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Converging Worlds, where game design meets theater, presented by the Associated Designers of Canada with support from Toaster Lab's Mixed Reality Performance Atelier. I am one of the co-curators of the symposium and a member of the ADC, and I am very happy to be your host for this event. I would first like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded lands of the settler city of Montreal, known as Tchagé by the current caretakers of the land, the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, which is and was long before colonizers arrived a place of conflict, conference, and creativity for many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and Abenaki peoples. The name Tchagé means broken in two for the way that the river splits around the island. I am honored and humbled to be able to be here to create and share with you all, and so I offer my thanks. And so, in this spirit of gratitude, I would like to acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts, our primary funder of the symposium as a whole, as well as our other sponsors, IATSE, the University of British Columbia, Theatre Alberta, CITT Alberta Chapter, Concordia University, Ryerson University, York University, and all of our individual donors. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank all of our volunteers, our presenters, and you, our attendees, for making this symposium what it has grown to be. Thank you very much. So for your information, all of our symposium events will be recorded and presented in a freely available archive on our website within a few days of the event. So thank you again for joining us here today. You're watching this live stream either on the Level Up website, which is levelup.designers.ca, or on HowlRound through our partners at Toaster Lab, or on the respective Facebook pages of the ADC or Toaster Lab. Now, regardless of your viewing platform, embedded on the same page of the video in the top right-hand corner of your window is the chat function. You can click on the little speech bubble and type in any questions or comments that you have at any time, and those will be read out to our presenter. This event can be enjoyed through auditory or visual access, or a combination of both. And as I will read out aloud all the questions that are asked through our chat function, and they will also appear visually on the bottom of the screen. Visual access is also supported by captioning for all speakers. Captioning will appear directly below the active speaker or in the presentation. If you require technical assistance to support your access, please email levelup@designers.ca for immediate support or to provide feedback following the event. If you enjoyed this session, please consider donating anything that you can to the Associated Designers of Canada to help support our National Arts Service Organization in achieving its goals of advocacy, mentorship, and industry promotion. Donation links are available on all viewing platforms on our website, the ADC's website, or on canadahelps.org, so please consider donating. So thank you for your patience with all of our announcements. It is now my pleasure to welcome our guest of this event. Zoe Sandoval is a Mexican-Venezuelan new media artist, filmmaker, and producer who specializes in interactive storytelling experience. Zoe's work spans live entertainment, performance, immersive installations, mixed reality, and emerging technologies, and their practice is influenced by themes of diaspora, nostalgia, ritual, and magic realism. Zoe received an MFA from the University of California, Santa Cruz in digital arts and new media, and is currently lecturing at UCSC's Arts, Games, and Playable Media program. Welcome, Zoe.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. Very excited for today. I'd love to just start things off, as I do with a lot of our presenters. If you can just tell me something that you have experienced or have worked on since the start of the pandemic, which you have found inspiring.
So it was a pretty small project amongst friends that I participated in pretty early on in this pandemic that still, rings true as something that was inspiring in a way. So at the beginning of the pandemic, especially in the United States, where I am calling from, we had a toilet paper shortage. And it was quite the debacle. But anyways, a friend of ours was saying, we should, amidst this chaos, like, what work can we be making that helps us, like, be able to move through this collective trauma that we're experiencing? And the idea was a data viz project that was about our toilet paper usage, just to like reflect on how much toilet paper we actually are using with, the hoarding that was happening. And so for 2 weeks, we counted each square of toilet paper that we used. And at the end of it, created a data viz project, which was the data viz part was like we made collages, not with the toilet paper, but like, about our toilet paper consumption. And, I was surprised at how much toilet paper I used. I was like, okay, I need to reflect on my consumption and my usage in this capitalist society and be more mindful about how much I'm actually using. And so maybe not a production or, an experience per se, but more a communal art making activity that was really helpful and insightful and reflective on, the times that we're in.
That's delightful and not at all where I was expecting you would go with that.
That's the first thing I thought of. I was like,
that's so great. And when you say collective trauma, you of course mean the fact that there is no toilet paper, right?
Yes, the that trauma that.
Well, thank you, thank you for sharing that. Very inspiring. And what is it? Why don't you tell us what you're going to talk about today?
Yes. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a production and experience that I worked on with UCLA a couple years back. It was an ambulatory theatrical experience that used augmented reality technology to help facilitate and mediate some of the storytelling. And so I'm going to talk to you about that research endeavor, tell you a bit about myself and some lessons learned, about using technology in a theatrical context. And so I am going to turn off my captioning because I need to do that in order to, I will stop captioning, hopefully. Let's see if I go like this. And then you see my slides. I will turn on captioning here. Let's see if it's working. Amazing. Great. Okay. So hello again to all of you. My name is Zoe Sandoval. I use she and they pronouns. I'm calling to you from the greater Los Angeles area, the unceded territory of the Chumash and Tongva peoples, as well as the Gabrielinos. And I'm going to talk to you today about Apprentice at the End of the World, a peek behind the curtain of this ambulatory production. Here you can see some snapshots of what it looked like. It incorporated some augmented reality elements through mobile devices and all that good stuff. But before I tell you about that, I want to give you a bit of background about who I am, because I always like to know kind of who's talking, what's going on, where are they coming from. And so a bit about me. So like, some of you, I wear many hats as a producer, as an artist, a creative programmer, an educator, you name it. I will play any role that is given to me, and I'm happy to, try new things. My work is very colorful. I also like very colorful things. It's heavily influenced by my background and my heritage. I'm Mexican Venezuelan, grew up in California and Florida. And so I often, in my work, I'd like talking about themes of diaspora, nostalgia, and influences of magical realism and the Caribbean, kind of as you can see here. And I primarily make interactive installations that explore audience engagement and play. I'm really interested in having audiences have a role and impact in the narrative or the experience that they're in. And so here in Reflected Refracted, we see folks moving through space. And what is going on is that they were moving through an RGB color space. So it was a research exploration that was looking at how do we move through color? How could a room know, how we were feeling or change its lighting depending on where you were? And so folks had these little trackers on them, and they could change the color of the space by just moving around within it. My installations are often these sort of playful interventions. Here, this was an opportunity for gallery visitors to engage in more than just spectatorship. This was the Wellness Wonder Cabinet that showed in Santa Cruz, where I invited gallery visitors and participants to share their own wonderful reflections and to place them in this medicine style cabinet. And so you could write something and leave it there and also read what other wonderful things folks had left behind. I often also integrate mechanics of play and game design within the works that I create. I really like pulling on ritual and ritualistic actions as ways to engage audience members in behaviors that feel sometimes mundane, like the act of writing, but that can be really powerful and sacred. And so, Divinación en Migración was an encounter with a living mediated oracle deck. And so this was an oracle deck that was inspired by my family's immigration to the United States, and that participants were able to add to by sharing their own stories that were documented and shared on Instagram. So a lot of this work, as Andrew mentioned, I did my master's at UC Santa Cruz, and I was part of a research group looking at experimental play. What are experimental forms of design and play and interaction that comes traditionally from game design, and how can we translate that to other forms? I was specifically looking at installations, as well as performance and theatrical spaces. And I really resonated with the notion of play, is in the sense of the Dutch historian Johan Huizinga. He talked about play as this assertion that play is essential for engagement and participation and the generation of growth and of culture. And so when we play, we generate new ideas, we explore and interrogate existing systems, and we're able to do that in settings that are not just about fun per se. They can be, we can play in senses that are more serious and that are more nuanced than just maybe child's play or what we traditionally think of as play. I am especially interested in places where attendees can be, transported into other worlds. Immersive spaces have become increasingly more popular. It really seems like just before this pandemic hit, immersive kind of fully projection with lighting and sound and everything, these kinds of interactive museums were just going up and up. We were seeing so many of them. And I'm still really fascinated with these kinds of spaces. I'm really excited to get back to these kinds of spaces. I feel like maybe in the United States, I have a different perspective just because we are moving so much slower than the rest of the world. But yeah, I'm really fascinated with how spaces can be imbued with magical realism, and that are places that are part of this world, but also distinctly apart from this world. And so this is the kind of work that I've been exploring and interrogating. Spaces as portals that are sacred in some way, sacred not in the sense of pure or pristine, but rather as kind of vessels for play and interactivity and interconnection. And that are places of collective storytelling, right? How do we engage other people with the stories that we're trying to tell? Theater is, of course, a ritualistic space, a sacred space where we gather and share and tell our stories. This is a site of great power and potential, and it's where we go to see stories unfold, and where we create stories. I came to theater in a pretty roundabout way. So I was never a theater kid. I was too consumed with magical realism and films like Pan's Labyrinth. And, way back when I did my undergrad at UCLA in the film and television side. And, I was fortunate enough to be part of the last class that shot 16 millimeter film. This is a still from that. You can still see the grain and the texture and the magic of that. But while I was at UCLA, I had the opportunity to be part of a class called Location-Based Audience-Aware Storytelling. And this was a class that was kind of brought about through the Google Glass Collective. back when Google Glass was a thing. And so we had the opportunity to kind of work with Google Glass in new ways. And I had never done anything besides traditional filmmaking before this, specifically documentary work. And so we had the opportunity to devise, some new storytelling experiences using Google Glass. The experience on the right, where folks are around a chessboard, was a live action role-playing experience, a LARP, that was kind of a Clue-style murder mystery, and participants wore Google Glass and received character information and tips about, what might be going on in the story via the little prism that they stared through. And this was my first introduction to a form of performance and theater. And I was really excited by it. I really enjoyed the playfulness, the visceralness, and the liveness that I didn't necessarily feel as much in filmmaking. And so this kind of really started to pull me into looking at experimental forms of theater and other kind of live action and live events. This class was put on by UCLA REMAP. This is the UCLA Center for Research in Engineering, Media, and Performance. REMAP is a research lab that's kind of sits between the School of Theater, Film, and Television and the School of Engineering. And so a lot of the work that REMAP does is about researching new technologies and their relationship to playable media and traditional storytelling techniques. One of their kind of mantras is looking at how we can combine things that are both radically ancient and radically modern. And here, this is me kind of walking around on stage during a Parents' Weekend presentation. This was kind of a demonstration of a motion tracking system called OpenPTrack that REMAP developed. Just to give a bit of context, REMAP has a long history of creating theatrical experiences, from main stage shows to new media installations. Their work largely focuses on researching new ways to integrate cutting-edge storytelling techniques with kind of new technologies, like working with sensors and kind of dynamic lighting systems. After I completed my BA at UCLA, I continued to work with REMAP. I was really interested in the work that they were doing and wanted to continue exploring these new approaches. And so I stayed on as their production coordinator and later as the lab's project manager for a few years. So one of the first productions that I was a part of was the Future of Storytelling Summer Institute. This was the basis for Apprentice at the End of the World, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. But this essentially was a summer intensive workshop for students, staff, and faculty, specifically looking at the role of virtual production in live performance entertainment. So how can we bridge the gap here, especially between theater and film? We were working with primarily theater actors, but in a context of virtual production that you see more in filmmaking and game design. And so we were bringing these two worlds and exploring approaches to markerless motion capture, real-time green screen compositing, and camera calibration techniques that you traditionally see in a television broadcast context. Like much of REMAP's previous work, we were exploring the potential of interdisciplinary collaboration. On this team of students, staff, and faculty, we also had scriptwriters from both theater and film. We had programmers from computer science. And we had, for this case, we primarily had theater actors. And we were, along with this collaboration, we were exploring, what is the role of technology within a rehearsal environment? And how do we think about working with technology really early in our process and not waiting to add on the technology once the production has already, been fully thought out? And, theater has long been the epicenter for the exploration of new technologies. Oftentimes, I think we think of maybe filmmaking and game design as being these innovators with, new technologies like ray tracing and things like that. But I really think that theater is one of the epicenters of where new technologies and ideas are generated. From perspective scenery in the 16th century to Pepper's Ghost in the 1800s to even the Laterna Magica Theater, which is what some consider to be the world's first multimedia theater. Theater has really been a long site of experimentation, of not only media and technology, but of play and immersion and the creation of the illusion so that, audiences can suspend their disbelief and embrace the unknown of what's going to unfold before them. Now we enter Apprentice at the End of the World. So I'm going to set the scene for you a bit here, and then I will give you a bit of background of the actual experience. So, drink some water. You find yourself in a post-apocalyptic world, migrating to uncover forgotten lore, in a world that's both old and new, mediated by magic and technology, but mostly magic. Apprentice at the End of the World was an ambulatory theatrical production devised during a 3-week summer intensive with the students and staff, again, of UCLA's School of Theater, Film, and Television, looking to explore the role of augmented reality technologies and their potential for social impact storytelling. My role for this project was as a creative producer, leading both the integration of the physical world, so the sets and the physical elements on stage, as well as the virtual world. So what we saw in both the projection and in the augmented reality application. And in doing so, I also managed the design teams and the software development teams for the production. This piece was adapted from N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season. This is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy. It's a sci-fi fantasy series that I highly recommend. It is honestly one of the best books and best series that I've read in a long time. So if you like sci-fi fantasy, The Fifth Season and the Broken Earth trilogy is just amazing. So the Fifth Season specifically tells the story of the people of the Stillness and their perils in the face of a climate apocalypse. Very resonant for where we are today. I feel like I didn't realize when I read this, almost 5 years ago. No, I guess no, it was less, a few years ago. Just what climate apocalypse was coming for us here in California with all the fires, but I digress. So it's the people of the Stillness, their perils in a climate apocalypse, and their struggle for existence in a dying world. It also deals with a revolution against colorism, racism, and oppression. And it's just the tale of migrating through a desolate landscape where you're trying to survive. Apprentice at the End of the World was both an exercise, in exploring storytelling techniques, but it was also a research initiative in social impact storytelling, specifically uplifting the stories of artists of color, of women of color, and honoring and sharing their perspectives with our work. It's important to note that this experience was never a main stage production. It was rather a series of educational and experiential exercises that were focused on research in augmented reality in the use of a theatrical context. And so we actually never sold tickets for this. It was rather what we had as a series of open rehearsals. And during the course of the summer workshop, we hosted 10 open rehearsals with about 8 participants in each session. Prior to entering the experience, the audience was invited to read about the exhibition material and see what our research questions were actually about. And here you see someone who was kind of like reading some of the materials waiting outside. And the experience was staged at UCLA's Froude Playhouse, which is like the main stage. So I'm going to sprinkle these throughout the talk, but some of the research questions that we had were, which elements of a story are most effective in terms of audience engagement and or enjoyment when implemented in the physical world, when implemented in projection or media, or when implemented and delivered to the audience via the augmented reality device. So we were working with a lot of screens, right? We were working with the physical environment as a screen, as an environment that we look at, the projection, as well as the devices. And so how do we think about which story elements are delivered on which of these various planes? And, how do we manage and control attention across all of these devices? The audience flow for this experience. So folks entered through the side door of the theater and then walked onto the apron. And that's where the magic unfolded. After they walked onto the apron, they were let through and then walked onto the actual stage of the Froude. So the pre-show really served as an onboarding experience and introduction to the technology. Similar to how a tutorial works at the beginning of a game, this is really essential for the introduction of this technology that the audience was able to use throughout the experience. So audience members were handed staffs with mobile devices that were loaded with the show's AR application. And so here you can see them hanging in the space amidst all the haze. They were these staffs, and then they had a phone on top, an Android phone that had the AR app. In addition to being introduced to the technology during this onboarding, participants found themselves face-to-face with the characters of the stillness. This is a technique similar to location-based entertainment, like theme parks where, Cinderella or Jasmine is hanging around outside of the ride or something to that effect. We also had our Dark Forces crew kind of hiding in the shadows of the curtains to act as tech support if needed during this time, such as the nature of working with new technologies. We knew that we would need to have them in some capacity that was not intrusive, in case the technology wasn't working or, something was off. And so they kind of hung out in the shadows throughout the experience. During this antechamber onboarding, we also introduced the audience to ritual movements and ritual actions that they could use to unlock media and narrative on their devices. And by ritual and ritualistic, I mean kind of intentional repeated behaviors or intentional repeated actions that could be used and learned to kind of call on and unlock the narrative in the experience. So they were taught the rules of engagement. One of the first rituals that they learned was that pointing their staff and their phone onto the ground, onto a marker, would unlock kind of media in the augmented reality in the space. And so here you can see a bunch of the audience members pointing their devices down onto the floor, onto a loric symbol. And they were able to repeat this movement throughout the experience onto symbols to uncover more information. Doing so you pointed down and you held your device up. This allowed you to see narrative in the space. And so here they were looking through their devices at something in the sky. It was an amethyst obelisk, which, if you know the story of the stillness, the obelisks floating in the sky helped guide the people of the stillness as they migrated through this apocalyptic landscape. So the obelisk throughout the experience actually moved from scene to scene or act to act, so that along with being guided by actors, there was also this kind of digital guide or beacon throughout the experience. One of the important research questions that we had is, how can the use of AR technology become part of the performance ritual rather than an intrusion? And how can AR elements be imbued with significance from the onset based on parallels to uses of devices in the real world? Here we saw, we had a lot of conversations about how do we give someone an AR device and like a phone that isn't their phone, and how do they carry it throughout the experience. It's really exhausting to hold your arm up a lot, even at a concert when you're recording a really iconic moment, you can only hold it up for so long. And so, putting it on a staff that was dressed with costume really helped to kind of integrate it into the world, and, that annoyance of having to hold something up the whole time. Once the onboarding was complete on the apron, the group was ushered through the proscenium onto the stage. And in the style of ambulatory theater with tones of Sleep No More, the group was broken into two divergent paths. So they were split into two. One went across to one side of the theater and the other went to the other side. During this time, they were learning new actions, participating, watching, guided by one of the actors in the experience, and learning new ritualistic actions to uncover this loric media. And so they learned how to maybe move their staff in a circle, both horizontally and vertically, to shake their device. And that was all unlocked in this next section. A big question that we had was, how do people interact with devices in an immersive atmosphere specifically, and how are we conditioned to pay more attention to our devices or to our surroundings? Right? We had a lot of questions around attention and thinking about, how do we guide someone's attention? Specifically, what does it take to get someone to look up from their device? We're so in our devices. How do we get them to look away from their device? We, of course, used lighting because lighting is always an effective tool. I'm a very visual person, so I'm a proponent of lighting. There was also some big subwoofers and some pretty intense sounds that helped as well. But we primarily used external factors in the environment to help guide the attention in this space. So rather than using something like look up on the phone itself, we drastically would change the environment around the audience so that they knew where to direct their attention. So I think we often take for granted just how convenient it is to be in the same physical space together, especially watching a show unfold. Many of you have probably experienced the complexity and nuance of hosting events online. I know, especially, right, the Level Up crew has been doing an excellent job of hosting this conference. But, as we've been engaging with, having these Zoom experiences and conferences and online mediated screens, events brokered by screens have many issues that can arise, from navigating time zones to what platforms you're using to even operating systems. You can often see issues of synchronization, access, lag, you name it. Many of those challenges that we're seeing today, especially, are equally present when coordinating mediated events and experiences across mobile devices. So crafting a shared experience in this case was really similar to the mechanics and deployments that you'll see, that you've seen probably in multiplayer games. How does the phone know where you're looking is a big question. How does it know what to show you so that you stay in sync with the story? Unfortunately, there's no little gremlin stage manager inside of the phone, that knows what to do. And so converging the physical and digital worlds for Apprentice at the end of the world was a similar alignment and synchronization process that was used in things like Ingress or Pokemon Go, and really required that level of understanding and deployment that is used in multiplayer games, because phones don't really know where they are, they don't really know where to look, and it required a bit of software development and a lot of testing and integration to get it to work. The synchronization cannot be overstated, I think, because synchronizing the digital world is essential so that everyone feels like they're on the same page, they see the same thing, they don't feel left out, right? If you have a phone and you're like, oh, I don't see that, like, why is mine different than your phone? Like, suddenly, the illusion is broken. You're now like thinking about the technology, like, why isn't it working? And so it was really important for us to focus on having the devices be synchronized and all be showing the same kind of content at the same time. Both the synchronization and the calibration, so where the virtual elements were placed on the world, was necessary in order for the whole experience to feel seamless and unified. Here you can see, so this was a horizontal view of the phone, a screenshot, and it showed, some of the elements floating in the sky and some of the elements that were placed on the floor, and one that was specifically meant to be like kind of floating in space. So a look further behind the curtain, or behind the screen in this case. I am a producer and a pragmatist, as I said, so I feel like I need to tell you the tools that we used in case you want to try something like this out for yourself. This application was made for Android phones. Specifically, we used the same phone. It was a Samsung Galaxy 5, I believe. And the multiplayer game was built in Unity and used AR Core for its augmented reality feature detection. And so that's like, how does it detect the floor? How does it know where to place elements and things like that? Building an AR app, during the production required a pretty rigorous iterative development cycle of prototyping, testing, and refining so that the application could be ready for daily rehearsals and then for the open rehearsals with the audience members. So for this experience, we were simultaneously devising the script, the theatrical movement of the piece, as well as the user interface and the mobile application, all during the workshop. It was a lot. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot. During this process, I have a pro tip. We learned that the calibration and plane detection system, which is the way that the virtual world can calibrate itself with the physical real world, did not like the obscureness of the theater. The way that feature detection works is that it needs features to be able to detect what is a floor, what is a table, you name it. With a black box theater or a dark theater space with black floors and dark walls, it was really difficult for the AR system to be able to calibrate itself. A lot of the times we saw like the floor was floating in the sky, like things were not lining up to where they were supposed to line up. Phones, unfortunately, don't have feet, and so they don't know where the ground is. And having really stable feature detection and plane detection is essential for calibration to work with augmented reality mobile technology. And so here you can kind of see on the left a lot of these blue overlapping planes. Basically, this shows that the phone was unable to have enough features to create one, complete plane. In this version on the left, before we took some steps to create more features, I believe there were 13 planes for one floor. That was no bueno. And then on the right, we had a very messy tech table with a bunch of cables and lights, and you could see that it had a easier time of creating one plane. And so because of this, we added texture to the floor. The managers of the stage, were not as happy with this, but, it was an essential research effort that we needed to explore in order to be able to tell if it was going to work better. And it did. So we ended up putting a pattern on the floor of speckled paint. It helps to also, make this stage also look more kind of like of this like rugged landscape. And so we added texture to the floors, we added texture to the scrims, you name it. If we could add texture and some additional features to it, we did. Here I also wanted to show you, so on the bottom left, that was one of the loric symbols that the audiences would scan in order to unlock the augmented reality elements. These symbols were designed and created by the students. And the way that they did so is they designed a subset of shapes that were then created as stencils. And then as a team, we went around and we placed the kind of initial markings of where we wanted the fiducial markers on the floor. And then we devised the shapes on the fly. And so we basically collaged the stencils together to create unique shapes and symbols that created one whole marker. And then what we did is we took pictures of those. So they became kind of like our QR codes. That's essentially how fiducial markers work. And then we put them in our system. And then we were able to use those as the QR codes, the loric symbols for the show. You know, there were a lot of lessons learned from this process. Working with new technologies, there's inevitably, you know, a bit of tension and really a lot of like rehearsal and experimentation to understand the limits and the bounds and possibilities of new technologies. We had some good lessons and feedback from audience members as well. The audience really enjoyed the narrative and the performances of the actors, but they did feel disoriented when they were first using the technology. They were also unsure about when they should be looking at their phone or at the performance. So this is something that we were anticipating as part of the endeavor. And it was true, you know, there was a bit of uncertainty about where to look. And what was interesting, though, is that they really would have liked more time to explore the space and unlock more symbols. And so that was a big thing that we heard from multiple people, is that they liked that process of like exploring and interrogating and looking through the space and seeing things and reading these kind of loric notes and texts that were around the space. They just felt like they wanted more time to do so. These experiences were all 30 minutes. So we did 10 rehearsals with 8 participants, and they were each like roughly 30 minutes each. Sometimes they went a little bit over. And we wanted to keep it pretty short just because of, you know, the amount of attention span of audience members engaging in this kind of interactive work. And also because, you know, it was a 3-week summer intensive. We could only make the experience so long without it being too much. I think more importantly, though, the takeaway that I got and that we as a group got was, you know, the notion of technology for the sake of technology. You know, like working with emerging technologies, I've been doing it for a long time, and it's really fun and it's really exciting. And a lot of the times when I've been working with emerging tech, it is because of grant funding and specific research to interrogate new technology and explore it. And when in that context, like, I think it's really great because you get to just play, you know, it's like a sandbox. But it's also important to note that some technology, sometimes you have to cut the technology or pare it back. At the beginning of this experience, we were considering using the motion tracking system OpenPTrack to be able to detect where people were moving in the space, so that there was also like responsive projection around them. And we cut it early on just because we asked ourselves a really important question: does it serve the piece? And it didn't serve that piece. We couldn't find a motivation for why have responsive projection in addition to the mobile AR. You know, we talked a bit about it, like, oh, well, it would be cool that, you know, they're synced together, and, you know, that would be another couple planes to have to sync, which is, as a producer in me, I was like, oh, geez. But, you know, I always come back to this question still, and this is a big takeaway for me from this experience. When using technology, does it serve the piece? is it actually going to improve, augment, and support and uplift the work? I found this like idea found its way back into my work. This was my master's thesis project. It was an immersive installation with 4-channel projection, an IoT lighting system, a DMX light, and all sorts of other kind of magical goodies. I was also interested in using a bit of motion sensing to have responsive projection. And after the Apprentice at the End of the World production, I came back to my final year of my master's and I was like, well, why do I want that? Does it serve the piece? Is it really going to help evoke the themes of longing and nostalgia and ephemera that I'm interested in? Or do I want to do it because I just like responsive media? And I cut it. I cut the motion sensing. Which was really hard for me. Actually, it was really a big thing I had to say no to early on, in order to better focus on refining the other interactive portions of the piece and to help better convey the essence of the work. The piece already had so much. This is a kind of time-lapse GIF, so it's moving faster than the actual experience. But I'm really interested in these immersive spaces and how responsive they are getting. Especially seeing the work in Art Tech House and Team Lab. The possibilities to imbue spaces with magic has always been so fascinating to me. And in working with new technologies, I've had to do a bit of like refining myself and like realizing, in order to create the suspension of, or to allow for the suspension of disbelief and to allow for the space to speak for itself and to immerse the audience, sometimes you have to take a bit away for that to happen too. It's a little bit of like a maximalism and minimalism together. But I think, there's a lot of power in these spaces in creating playful and immersive spaces that transport us into magical worlds where we can both experience the story, but also potentially share in the story ourselves. And, the center of my work frequently comes back to our relationship to play. Play is the mediator of the invisible and the visible. This is a quote by Dora M. Koff. They are a Jungian psychologist who is, I believe, the creator or helped devise sand play, which is like playing with sand as a way to like navigate your own internal world. But I do think that play really does have an important role when we think about like tying together and facilitating creativity and change and the work that we do, the work that we create, the potential that we offer our audiences when engaging with our work. And so I encourage all of you to be more open and more playful with the possibilities of your work and your practice. Because, as we see with this pandemic, what sometimes feels like a post-apocalyptic world itself, we have to be open to play and to, let the work ride and to just like embrace the possibilities there. So that is all. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Zoe Sandoval. These are my social media and website things. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's a lovely presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's very thorough. There's a lot to unpack. And so just to start with, do you think that this piece itself could exist without the AR technologies involved?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, actually. The actual piece, the actual book that it's referencing, the 5th season, has a lot of fantastical elements that I'm not sure we could have created. Sometimes I see those elements in escape rooms, where they're using somewhere between physical computing and traditional technologies to create these like fantastical exploration spaces. Oh, let's see if I can turn my captions back off. Back on. I just realized that. Let's see if it's gonna do it. Okay, we're back, I think. Do I have captions?
You're back.
Yes. Okay, great.
You made
Yeah,
it.
so I think with Apprentice at the End of the World, we're going to need to do some sort of magic or trickery or illusion to create the world of the stillness and to be able to adapt the work, just because it had magical real elements. And so I think augmented reality was a good way to kind of showcase that magic in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I am a huge fan. I just sort of say that I'm a huge fan of both escape rooms and video games in general for the way that when you yourself as a participant become immersed in that world, and you kind of lose a little bit of yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really glad that you bring up escape rooms, because there's definitely an elements of storytelling and theatricality in it.
Yeah.
That you start to question how once you start to add in actors,
Right.
the world's blends so perfectly well together. So, when you talk about social impact storytelling, do you think it's more or less successful in an interactive performance piece?
I think it's more successful. I generally have felt that immersive and interactive work really places audience and participants like sometimes quite literally in the story, but it also engages them with the story in a much more direct way, where sometimes like they're required to respond rather than just sit and watch. And so I feel like having those components that are responsive and interactive really allows for harder questions and harder discussions to happen. And so UC Santa Cruz also has a game design program called an MS in Serious Games. And I think there's a lot of potential in creating these interactive play systems that are about really serious topics and about, underrepresented stories, are about things that we don't normally hear or think about. And rather than just having someone watch it, having someone engage in a critical way is really powerful.
Mm-hmm. And so did you have any, were there any like notable experiences of your participants that were really emotionally connected to the piece?
So we did do debriefs at the end of each run with audience members. I think there is a final line where you have a piece of technology and then some people are just like, oh, wow, this is really cool and interesting. And maybe they get diverted by that. So definitely the relationship between telling impactful stories, but then also having this new tech, trying to balance it out, was a big factor. But there were definitely some people who felt very emotionally connected to the character that they were split off with. And so there's the onboarding, and the team splits into two, and or the audience splits into two, and they learn the stories and the struggles of that character. And afterwards, there were some audience members who their reflection was specifically about the journey that they went on with this character. And, for one of the groups, it was about helping them find their child who was like lost across the stillness and was this like phantasm in augmented reality. That's how we manifested them. And so for them, it was, they felt like they were like actively helping them trying to find their kid. And so that was really resonant for them. Even if there was, maybe this weird technology that they were doing it through.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because then that also means that your audience members are having different experiences. And so you've got this kind of interesting, the divergence, and then coming back together to actually discuss it at the end. Suddenly that's a new experience, and it helps the conversation, which I think is really quite great. So then I guess it dovetails really well into this audience attention versus their experience with the AR tech, and you want to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm kind of curious, and I know that I have a lot of conversations that I've had with creators who want to put digital into their show or use new emerging technologies. There's a fear that keeping people's attention will be really hard, or like focusing it in certain ways. So what was your experience with that?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I feel like we have a hard time even in our daily lives navigating attention with our devices, like putting our devices down and focusing with this hyper mediated and hyper stimulated environment is already so difficult in daily life. And so then introducing that into an immersive environment can be a really tall ask of folks' attention, right? Yeah. I think it really helps, right? The ritual of going to the theater, of like, okay, or sitting down to watch a movie, or, I'm going to take the time to do this thing, is really important. And that intentionality really helps sets the stage of like the buy-in from audience members. But we did struggle with like how much is too much in AR versus what is unfolding in front of them. And what actions should they be paying attention to? And so we decided not to have very much text in AR. We left it more as kind of symbols or treasures or tiny bits of information. There was some loric text, like rune-like poetry, but we did not include any kind of didactic directions, like look up or like things like that. We decided not to do any of that, and instead use the environment to help guide direction. But even after that, we that's the direction that we chose. And after that, we still heard from audience members that at times they were just not sure if they should have been looking at the dialogue, or like they're like off exploring. And I think it was nice to hear that they did enjoy the exploration process, because for some folks it was like they just wanted to keep exploring. They're like, oh, but there's this thing unfolding, so I should pay attention to that. But I'm having such a good time, on my little scavenger hunt.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've definitely seen pieces where you have that ability to explore, and there's just so much information coming in that for me, who's pretty scatterbrained sometimes, but I'm also constantly in my computer and I can have 20 windows open, that becomes part of the experience, is just too much information. And so what was I guess it's really doesn't really matter, but do you think that more people were interested in it being more streamlined, or were they more interested in the openness of the presentation, like the openness of the ability?
I think the experience could have been longer. We were worried that it was already too long. Like we were already asking them for 30 minutes and maybe they weren't gonna, it would have been too long. But actually, I think it could have been longer, and we could have better segmented the parts where like, cool, you learned a new technique. Like now you can do this with your device, and you're now like uncovering all this other stuff. Like we're going to give you more time to explore that. Rather than like, now we're going to pivot to this other scene. So I think having had more time, and if this was a main stage production or something that we were really going to do, feeling out those beats a bit better, and like really being able to refine and play test, from essentially the open rehearsals were like real play tests with audience members. And I think it really was, sometimes they really wanted more time to explore after learning a new technique. And so it could have been twice as long, so that, be like, okay, I explored stuff now, but now I'm ready for action, right? Like now it's like, okay, I've done this enough. I think maybe we had it too kind of, we were like, okay, we got to keep it moving. Let's go.
Yeah, it's interesting because like video games, you'll play a game. It's like 30 hours over the course of the entire game.
Yes.
So there's always like a tutorial at the start that you learn your abilities slowly over the course of an hour. Right. So a half hour is really quick in order to teach all these rituals and the story and the whole experience. So yeah, that's great. I would just want to ask, just from purely pragmatic point of view, is how big was the team that built this?
That is a great question. So I believe all in all, there were about 30 people or less. Some of them, we had mostly graduate students, and I think the team of graduate students was really small. We had a lot of undergrads too that were helping us, and they were more in and out of the experience. But the core team, so the way it was divided is that there were 3 directors, and someone got to take the onboarding, someone got to take the split scenes, someone got to take kind of the ending. And then there were 2 writers. And then we had a couple lighting designers, a couple costume. It might have even been less than that, honestly. I just remember there were some undergrads that were coming in and out. So they were more kind of like transitory, like seeing the experience. But we did have, for the software development portion of the piece, so the AR app, that was led by 2 staff software engineers. And then, so they work at Remap. And then we had 1 undergrad and I believe a grad student. So that was a team of 4 who did the app. So they were really small. I should have looked at those numbers before this, but I think it was less than the 30 people. It might have even been 20. It was pretty tight. And it was developed over the course of 3 weeks. There was a class, so it was done in the summer. There was a spring class, but there wasn't any development done during that class. It was more like the conceptual workings with new technologies that kind of led up to this.
Okay. And so you said that in those 3 weeks, was the software developed entirely within that, or was there an extra week? I can't remember from our first talk.
Yes. So the software development, there was 1 week before the 3 weeks. There was 1 week that was mostly like, what are we going to use? It was more just like, what are the tools that we're going to use? How are we going to use it? And then what are the roles going to be? And like really basic stuff like setting up the GitHub repository, getting all the phones ready. And then the real development process started when the Institute started, and we knew what we had to build based off of the desires and the, creative direction of the students.
Okay. In the experience, was there within the AR, because you could talk about synchronization being a big thing, were there world events that went across the whole piece and everyone's phone?
Yes, it was the ending especially. There was kind of a moment where, so there were 2 scrims that were dividing the space, and those flew up. And then everyone came together for like the big finale. And there was one big world event, which is like where everyone's holding their phones up. There's like this thing in the sky, and everyone has to do like a particular movement, and it happened all at the same time. And it was in order to like defeat this thing, to like break this obelisk.
Yeah.
And so there was one big one, and then before that, it was kind of broken into 2. So they were like these separate paths. And so those phones were coded that way. And so some audience members were given one set of the application, and the other were given the other set of the application to uncover those elements.
Okay. That's super exciting. I love the idea of playing with something live with an entire audience and having everyone come together for a final moment where you all get to defeat the boss together.
Yeah,
I can imagine the energy being pretty.
Yeah, it was fun. It was
like, it's great. So we have a question from our chat. What game mechanics would you be most excited to implement in performance?
What game mechanics would I be most excited to implement in performance? Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I feel like there's game mechanics translate pretty easily, I think, to like theatrical exercises. And so like the ticking clock is a game mechanic that is used in, digital games, but also in games like or like theatrical exercises where, you know, you have to do something within a certain amount of time. I'm like not totally a theater person. I've only done them adjacently, so I don't know the actual names of the exercises. But I really like the ticking clock because the ticking clock is a really simple way, right? It's like, how much time do you have? Or like, there is a way to know how much time you have to do something. And that's a really clear and simple mechanic. I always think that the more simple the mechanic, the better. Or like the more simple action, the better. And how, you know, if it can be discrete, then, you know, it's great. When things get layered on top of each other, where it's like, you have to do this, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this, that gets a little bit harder. And that feels like it's more, right, like escape roomy. Like it's more of like a more complex puzzle. And you're like, we are solving a puzzle right now. So I feel like game mechanics that are, you know, just the simpler they are, the better, in order to get buy-in for people to do them or to participate within them.
Well, see, that transitions really well to just theatrical principles in general, where a lot of times you're trying to figure out a problem, you're trying to figure out a solution for something that you want to have happen on stage, and it often just comes down to what is the simplest way that we can do this. You know, you try to like build this really complex system that involves tons of computers and sensors and all that, and you're like, well, why don't we just cue the thing, right?
Yeah, or low tech solutions. I also like have been reflecting on that a lot as well. I did a series of like writing installations. Like there was like writing on these little pieces of paper, writing on tarot cards. And so I found that that was a really meaningful way for audiences to engage, that they had their own knowledge of how to write. Like I can write something, and like with a simple prompt, they can engage and they felt like satisfied. Like I wrote a thing. Yeah, I did it. Like, oh, not like, I don't know how to do this. Like writing is something that, you know, most even small kids can usually participate in, if even it's just a drawing. And so the way that my master's thesis installation ended up having like an interactive component is that I just stuck with the act of writing a love letter. And so in the piece, you would write a love letter based off of a prompt. And it was a love letter to a place you could no longer return to. And so, and there were a couple other prompts, but it was really interesting to see people come through the space. And some people would stay for the duration of the show, because it was a cued experience with the projection changing. That was 45 minutes. And some people would sit and hang out in there just because they liked the space, and they would write every single prompt and go through the whole experience. Other people would write really short letters. Other people would write really tiny. But the low tech, kind of low barrier to entry was really satisfying, and I think worked really well.
Sorry, what I might have missed that. What was the name of that piece?
That was Remnants of a Ritual. Yeah, that was my MFA thesis, where I was like, I will cut the motion sensing technology, even though I don't want to.
I did not miss that. I just missed in this comment.
No worries.
Terrible host. Terrible host. I'm not paying attention to any of the presentation. No, that's really great. Yeah, simple is often really totally the way to go. So in connection to that question, and we probably Torian wants to know any games that you'd recommend.
I'm playing a really funny game right now, but I love it so much. It's kind of expensive, but I committed to it. They have a good demo. It's the Hyrule Heroes Calamity Ganon thing. It's like the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild beat 'em up, which is actually really good. It's $60, so it's like the cost of like a big game, but it's actually really good and really long. And the demo is amazing. I've been playing that a lot. It's low energy for me, like in the sense of, or low buy-in. Like I don't have to read a lot. I'm mostly just like mashing buttons, and it's really satisfying at the end of the day. So I've been playing that a lot. I've been playing a lot of dungeon crawlers too. There's Wizard of Legend. That's also really good. It's a smaller game.
That's great. I've been thinking about getting the Hyrule Warriors game too, but
Actually,
I'm
good.
yeah, I'm currently 100%ing Breath of the Wild, so that's my what
Oh,
I'm doing.
yes, I
Just
did
in my
that.
spare
You were
time.
like 30 hours games, and I was like immediately Breath of the
Yes.
Wild. Played it a couple times. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. What else? What is other things that I wanted to ask? Because I caught myself off guard as I think about questions about games. You ask what is the role of technology in a rehearsal context? So, can you speak a little bit more about that in terms of this process?
Yeah, I think with this and every production that I've done with Remap and since then, I work with technology as early as possible. Like, so if we're going to have technology in a piece, we are using the technology probably even before we even know what the thing is. Just because working with technology really takes a lot of nuance, a lot of understanding, a lot of troubleshooting. And so, you know, I think it's always better to start working with it as early as you can, just to get exposed to it, so that nothing comes up in production that you know, like, oh yeah, there was maybe that like weird glitch that one time, but I don't know what it is. You don't want that to come up. You don't want that glitch to show itself during the show, because it will if you don't like go
Mhm.
through like really spending, you know, creating a relationship with the technology basically. And so working with technology in rehearsal is really interesting, especially with actors who maybe haven't used it as much, or just other folks on a team who haven't used experimental technologies, is always you know, a bit of an adventure, because you know, when something doesn't work immediately, I think the immediate response that we as humans tend to have is like, oh, I don't know how to do it. It's broken. I don't want to use it. And having like meaningful conversations with teams about the importance of embracing the process is so important. Just because it's easy to be like, this doesn't work. I don't know how to use this. Like, let me know when it's ready. Um, but in order for it to be ready, it needs to be used, right? That's like the nature of programming and software design, is that you can design a piece of software, and if someone else has to use it, like an audience member, you have to do user testing. And that usually means it's with your team, and they have to be, you know, open, and hopefully open to doing that. Because it's easy to be like, oh, okay, so we're going to have some tech, they're going to work on the tech, and then, you know, they'll let us know when it's ready. Well, and inevitably what that means is really you should be having tech from the beginning, right? You should always be working with it all the time, even if it feels like maybe that slows down the rehearsal process. But I feel like it really, if there is some sort of meaningful technology in the piece, the actors will have to change how they're acting if they wait to use it until the end, especially if there's like some sort of responsive piece of element. One of Remap's earliest work was also, there was a staff that the wizard, I believe, like had, and they would, you know, bang it on the stage, and the lighting and the sound would change because they were causing lightning. And so, you know, the actor needed to have that from the beginning, so that they knew how sensitive it was. They knew how to really work it into the piece. And so I'm always about like, use it as early as you can and as much as you can, so that everyone feels comfortable with how it will impact the piece.
That's a really good example, because then you've got the performer have the comfort knowing that it's been worked in from the start. They have the comfort and the ability to choose when they want to smack it on the floor, and so they're not bound to a script moment, or they're not necessarily bound to script moments, or not necessarily bound to other like stage management calls in terms of when that actually happens. They have the freedom to use it, provided that it's been integrated from the start. And I think that's a really good point, that integration of the tech when it's an element of importance within a piece, starting from the beginning and not keeping it as something separate, is really, really important.
Yeah.
And in the context of Apprentice at the End of the World, you were saying there is about this that the floor had to be painted in order for the tracking to actually connect with it. That if those were kept completely separate and
Oh my
didn't come in
gosh.
until the end, that would have been a very last minute kind of change.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and we had to actually paint it twice. So we did it
Okay.
once and we checked it and we were like, okay, it's better. So we know that this is going in the right direction. But it was still a little off. And then like our developer was like, add more. Just can you add more? And I was like, yeah, I think we could add a little more. We already painted it, so let's just add more.
Just
Let's do it again. We're like with this like little paint spray. And then the next day they were like, perfect. This is great.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a question from the chat. Do you have any recommendation for beginners in terms of courses or
Yeah, I was
resources?
looking at that and I was wondering what the question meant, like recommendations for working with new technologies or
Well, because there's a bit of a lag, I'll just say that in terms of
right.
doing this kind of low tech game technology within performance context.
So in terms of working with augmented reality, there are a few cool apps that allow you to do really quick tests with something like using a QR code or be able to have an element that appears on, a specific image. Wikitude is really good. It's been around for a really long time, but it's really easy to use. It's Wikitude, Tuid. That one's been around for a long time. I think the other one's name is Aurasma, like Aura Asthma. I'm pretty sure that's the name of it. I hope that's the name of it. But those are applications that already, have the AR capability. And you can kind of create a little application within it to test. We wanted to create a standalone app as part of the research effort. And so that's why we built it in Unity and deployed it ourselves on the devices. But there are a few existing things like that. I've been seeing a really cool advertisement. I'm like, commercials are getting to me. For the Snap Lens Studio, which is Snapchat's new studio for creating face filters that I've been wanting to play around with just because I am a programmer. I came to programming via filmmaking and via the arts. And so I like using Touch Designer because it's a visual-based programming language. I can do a little bit of Python programming, but it is limited. And so when I look for applications to use, I often come to it from the perspective of using After Effects and Adobe Premiere. So like the more nodes and little noodles there are, I'm like, sweet, I can probably figure out how this works. And I think Snap Studio, the Snap Lens from Snap Studio, has some interface for creating cool like AR facial elements.
It's actually it came up. One of our other presenters, Anand Rajaram, was speaking specifically about that because that's a tool that he uses in terms of his visual creations. Because Snap Camera is like very easy to use. And you can build your own skins and bring into it, or it just has like hundreds of them. I think we keep bringing them out in our staff meetings. Because everybody's on Zoom.
Like, yeah, exactly. It's like we're all like on camera, so I'm like, yeah, I want little sparkles to just like come off my face. That would be lovely.
You're like, I'm tired of looking at my normal face all the time. Why can't I just have the face of a potato, an actual potato this time? It's great. I think that I don't know where I was going to go with that, but that's and it's free. That's the other thing.
Another thing I was going to say is TikTok. I think is having a really big influence on like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram. All of their filters are having, I think, a really big impact on how we think about and see augmented reality. And so those applications, I think, even though I don't love them for maybe their social media impact, I do think that there is a lot of potential for the kind of like, it's almost like being able to, have access to, robust face tracking technology, which is weird, but also they have really great examples and implementations of filters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does enter into a bit of a weird
yeah, like,
weird moral space, a weird ethical
right.
space where you're like, oh yeah, they can track your faces, but also you can do a lot of fun stuff with them
right,
that we can make into art.
Right.
Yeah, so the software that was developed for Apprentice at the End of the World, has it gone on to a second life, or was it just used as research and then that's it?
So I believe so. In 2019, there was another summer institute that I was not a part of, but that did build off of the AIR application. And so they, with everything, I think in a research context, you usually you work on it and then you put it somewhere, but you end up building on it just because that is the nature of like trying to continue the work and continue the effort, and also to not make things again. And so I believe they did end up doing another production it was also an adaptation like of another work. I think it was Man in the High Castle, but I can't totally remember. But it was again like another like educational, experimentation and exploration.
Cool. Yeah, that's really great. So what's up next for you?
What's up next? That's a great question. I am trying to get back into a making practice. This pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was doing a bit of making. I showed some work at the beginning of last year in a show in San Francisco, which was really fun. And I did participate in this fun coding intensive over the summer during the pandemic. But the second half of the year has been really hard. I moved and have been helping family with distance learning and trying to navigate working from home while managing a small child going to school to help family. That has been consuming a lot of my time. Yeah. And I'm trying to like finally ground myself and adjust and, start making work again. This talk has been really helpful because I've been like reflecting on the work and I'm like, yeah, this is great. I was like, I need to like get back in it. It's like time to like make space for making again. And so I'm still, I think, still in a grounding process because this pandemic has really been kind of a bit of an upheaval in terms of being able to make space for making. I see some people who are like, yeah, I have nothing to do and I'm just making all the time. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice. It's like so beautiful. Good for you. Yes. Yep. I'm still, trying to get back to that process. But I do have a new Connect Azure, which I'm really excited about, and like some other like fun technology. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna just like experiment and play around, and we'll see where it goes from there.
That's exciting. Yeah, we bought a Connect Azure within the context of the pandemic too, because it was like, I got time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then now there's no time. So
I know. I have it in my eyes. I'm like, I see you, Connect. I see you. We're gonna hang out. We will.
Yeah. we're gonna play together.
Yeah, exactly.
You just sit on the shelf for now.
Right. For just a little bit longer.
Yeah. So this has been really great. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time to throw them in there. Is there anything else that Zoe, you haven't had the chance to speak on that you really want to impart upon the world? We have 5 minutes.
Wow, that's a great question. Black Lives Matter. Love that. Put that into the universe. I was working on an anti-racist postcard project.
Cool.
Yeah, after kind of all of the unrest over the summer that I started, that like in the move kind of like disappeared, like with the US election and the move and everything. It was like, there's too much going on, that I never finished it. But I got some good feedback from some friends. But basically the idea was that we had these anti-racist postcards that said, dismantle white supremacy, Black Lives Matter. Each one was different. And it had, in the style of like 90s posters, like really cute kittens like, or an adorable little animal. And then it had this like text graphic on it, and you could anonymously send it to someone if you felt like maybe they needed that encouragement, you know, like smash the patriarchy a little bit, dismantle white supremacy. Maybe you need that in your life. But yeah, that project, I was like, I just have to finish the website. It's like almost done. But like, you know, as is the nature of these weird times, it's been, again, like hard to like ground and finish, but done is better than good. I have been like coming to that. There's a bit of like sometimes a desire for perfectionism that I have with my work and my designs. And I'm like, done and a work in progress is better, so that you can get feedback and you can iterate rather than being like, no, I'm going to wait until it's like perfect. So I've been trying to like embrace that mantra and like be like, okay, let's like put things out in the world, even though maybe it doesn't feel done.
That's a super hard lesson for, I think, for a lot of people to learn, especially in design or as being artists. We're like, we don't want to give away our
like,
our tiny shiny box.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
yeah, until it's finished. But yeah, putting things out there for the world to see is hard. But I think that's a really good point to put out. And I also love this idea of smashing down racism with like cute
cats
posters, cats.
Right, because you're like, you see it and you're like, this cat is so cute, and then you're like, dismantle white supremacy, and it's like, yes, the kitten is encouraging you. Look at this.
Yeah, even horrible racists like cats, so maybe they'll listen. That's great. Thank you so much. We have no more questions, so this has been really great, and thank you for coming and sharing with us. And keep on keeping on, and keep doing your work. And
thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with getting back into your making. That's really great.
Yes. Thank you. Hope the rest of the conference goes well. I'm excited to be part of the panel on Monday, so I will see you all then. Thank you so much.
Yeah.